Yes. Well, thank you for your announcement. Well, that was the introduction was done, so we can go on. I'll tell you something about. I'll give you a brief historical overview of the salmon in the Rhine and how we work with the programs for salmon and migratory fish. Then I'll focus on the downstream migration, on facilities to help fish pass hydropower installations, on turbine design, and on overall migrational success. And finally, there will be some conclusions. Well, this map shows you how widely spread the salmon used to be in the Rhine system, and also where the lake constant trout was to be found. And historical figures on the supply to fish auctions count up to almost 250,000 in 1885, but after that peak the amounts diminished until the complete extinction of the salmon in the Rhine system. And the photo on the right-hand side shows you the last salmon caught in the Rhine, in the Els, I think it says. And then in 1986, the Sandoz fire disaster practically wiped out the life in the mainstream of the Rhine when a storage of chemical pesticides burned down. And already 1 year later, the Rhine Ministers brought the Rhine Action Program into life. Well, I only tell you this because the ministers took the salmon as a symbol for a healthy Rhine, which was a rather brave thing to do at that time, because it was an extinct species. However, in the years that followed, the water quality improved significantly, and nowadays we work with the Master Plan Migratory Fish Rhine that aims at the restoration of a healthy aquatic ecosystem. And with a healthy aquatic ecosystem, you will also have a population of Atlantic salmon. So this objective is to be achieved by restoring the river continuity, not only for the salmon, but for all other species, by restoring habitats and by reintroducing young salmons into the system. The map that you see will be part of the second River Basin Management Plan according to the Water Framework Directive. So it's not for Switzerland, but for all the other countries it is important. And it gives you an impression of the parts of the Rhine system that are now accessible for migratory fish. Well, you can see we have done a lot, but there is still a way to go. The total costs for the whole program are now estimated at 560 million euros. So that will be the whole program, everything that is envisaged now. And I have to tell you that these are the data of October 2014. In the next slide, I'll go quickly through the measures taken. And I'll start with the river continuity. As you can see, we are working on the improvement of the river continuity, and not only for salmon, but also for the other species. And between 2000 and 2013, almost 500 barrage weirs were made passable for fish. And it must be said that up to now, the main focus has been on the upstream migration. Secondly, work is being done on the improvement of habitats. All in all, more than 1,000 hectares of spawning and juvenile habitats are supposed to be opened in the Rhine catchment. And in 2012, about a quarter of that, about 250 hectares, were already made accessible. Then finally, the stocking. Millions of young salmons and also of other species have been stocked. And all over the Rhine system, the benefits of these actions are to be seen by the growing numbers of fish species that have not been seen by long. And it's not only the salmon, but also, for example, the shad and other species. There are even places where the stocking of salmon can be reduced because of the natural reproduction. And in this map you can see the very small fish symbols, and where we place the fish symbols, there we have natural reproduction. And the bigger the symbol, the more natural reproduction we have. So I think that's very encouraging if you think of 1987, when the salmon was an extinct species. All these developments led to this picture on the presence of salmon. And I know I will get a question from Ted Castro, because this is not about percentages, but about the absolute figures. However, it started with a very happy happening in 1990, that the first salmon was found on the Rhine again. So after that, we kept on counting. But as you can see, since 2007, the trend of growing numbers of returning salmons developed in a reverse direction. And it must be said that even for the fish experts, it is a slightly puzzling picture. There are several possible reasons for this development. It could be that natural predators get used to the growing amounts of smolts. It could be the difference in monitoring. For example, in the Netherlands, fishing with fikes is forbidden since 2011, and we got a lot of data from that. It could be works in the river system. For example, the land reclamation for the Rotterdam harbour, or the temporal closure of the fish pass in Kostheim. And also the effect of hydropower installations is mentioned. However, as I stated on the bottom, the latest figures are promising again. In the first 6 months of this year, both in Kostheim and in Gamsheim, the numbers of counted salmons were already higher than the yearly averages of the last 5 years, with another 6 months to go. In Kostheim, 72 salmons were counted, with the yearly average being 70. And in Gamsheim, 56 animals were counted, with the yearly average being 39. With the growing numbers of fish migrating along the river, it became clear that not only the upstream, but also the downstream migration must be secured. The effects of hydropower installations are becoming more and more visible. And partly this is because there are more fish that can be damaged, and partly because the policies on renewable energy increase the number of hydropower installations. Therefore, in 2013, the Rhine Ministers at a conference stated that for a juvenile salmon or adult eel, the downstream migration in the turbine areas is critical because of the great danger of injuries, particularly in cases of successive hydropower plants. And the ministers stated that no new obstacles should be constructed, and asked the ICPR to work intensively on the joint determination of innovative techniques of downstream migration. So I think now it becomes more interesting for you, because this is where we started to, in order to comply with the wish of the Rhine Ministers. We started with an inventory of the bottlenecks for downstream migration. All the Rhine countries collected data. And in this map you can see an overview of the 552 obstacles or bottlenecks along the river. Only a few of them have downstream migration facilities, namely 29, which is about 5%. And I should click. We asked the authorities whether there was fish mortality or not, and as you can see in the bottom left, it's about 45% of the installations they don't know, and even in the cases where downstream migration facilities are installed, still 34% they don't know whether they work or not. However, you also can see that they expect that there is a positive effect of the downstream migration facilities. Now, later on, we'll see whether that's whether they do work. Of course, these facilities are needed mostly in the cases where we have hydropower. Now, in the Rhine system, the most widely used design, the most usually wide designs date back to the 19th century and the beginning of the 20th century, in times where fish migration was not an issue. And in the Rhine system, the Kaplan turbine is dominant, where we counted 159, especially along the mainstream of the river. And other types are the Francis and the Banque Michel, which the last also is known as the cross-flow turbine. And in smaller, newly built stations, you see sometimes the Archimedes screw turbine. Well, this picture of the Kaplan turbine here, you see there's a man standing on it. So it's a huge thing. This is one of the turbines that is installed in the Vogelgrün installation. Well, numerous experiments have been conducted in various countries to determine the mortality rate due to the passage through the turbine. And that rate varies from under 5% to over 90% in France's turbine, so the one over here. And on average, it's a bit lower in Kaplan turbines, from under 5% to approximately 20%. Well, we'll hear more about this when Steve Emerald does his presentation. When passing the hydropower installation, fish can be harmed by obstacles in their path, the turbine blades or the guiding vanes. So you see, this is the turbine, and here you have some guiding vanes. By the differences in pressures and by high flow rates and turbulences. And apart from this direct damage, you also could have indirect damage, for instance, a higher predation rate after passing a hydropower installation, or even after passing a fish passage. We know from the Maas River in the Netherlands, there's a fish pass at Linnen, equipped with a camera. And I know from somebody who told me that they saw a giant catfish swimming in front of the camera. And well, there's only one thing that a catfish would do there, I think. So the first measure is to prevent fish from passing the turbines by using screens. We have 3 recent studies to downstream migration facilities, and I must say that my Mr. Bauerfeind already showed you some of those. Not this one, however. The first study we found was on Kostheim. The Kostheim installation in the Main River. It's a study of 2011. The hydropower station there was built between 2007 and 2009. It's a horizontal Kaplan. 2 horizontal Kaplans with a flow rate of 80 cubic meters per second. It's about 3.5 meters ahead. And the fish migration facilities are a bypass river for upstream and downstream migration, a protective screen, 20 millimeters wide and 0.5 meters per second velocity, and an eel shaft. And the designed mortality, so this is what they thought that it would be, was less than 10%. Well, this turned out not to be the case. The mortality is about 50% because of the screen cleaning, because of screen and turbine passage, and it depends a bit on the discharge, on the species, on the individual differences, and also on the intervals in screen cleaning. The screen turns out to be passable for eels smaller than 65 centimeters and for other species smaller than 25 to 30 centimeters. Smolts passed the screen tail first and were stripped of their scales before being struck by the turbines. Even at optimal circumstances, which should be optimal at low use of the turbine, about 50% of the bigger eel ends up in the garbage coming from the screen cleaning. In normal operation, the eel shaft is used neither by eel nor by other species as a downstream migration facility, and the bypass river is not significantly used by migratory fish for downstream migration either. Finally, the Salmonite's downstream facility at top of the screen does not work. So something must be done there. It's a bit of a pity because the whole installation cost about 20 million. Well, there will be 2 installations that were already presented to you. Onkelmühle in the Sieg. The station is 3 times Francis, 28 cubic meters per second, ahead of 3 meters. Fish migration measures are a vertical slot, a screen. Well, you've seen everything about it. What wasn't told that there's also a bottom gallery, and that's especially for downstream migrating eel. And the idea is that the eel swims to the screen and then swims back into the bottom gallery and is moved downstream. Yeah, these pictures give you a quick impression of the building, of the installation and the monitoring via the bypass at the top of the screen. And these are the first results of a campaign that monitored fish that used the surface bypass openings at the upper end of the screen. It gives you an impression of the species that pass downstream, but of course it doesn't tell you whether fish will pass the turbine or not, because it was just one spot. And well, in order to tell more, or at least it's promising that there are many individuals caught, and this was in about 2 months period in the spring. A 3-year period of biological and technical monitoring will be ongoing until the end of 2016 in order to evaluate the biological and the technical results. And by the technical results is meant the energy production and the energy losses. Because the screens are good news for the fish, but also cause a loss of head. And these are the places where the antennas are installed around the installation. And here they are installed within the installation. So I think after 3 years we will be able to tell a lot more of what's happening there. And in spring 2014, there were already smolts equipped with radio tags and silver eels released upstream of the installation. Next one, also well-known slide. Auer Kotten in the Wupper River. This was an existing hydropower station that was where the screen was placed in front of. So it's a Kaplan turbine, 14 cubic meters per second, 3 meters head. Well, we've seen everything that was there installed, so I won't go into that. The bypass, again, you've seen that. So the question was to evaluate the functionality. The installation is equipped with 16 HDX antennas, and yesterday Hendrik Hoefkaart already showed you how they work, so I don't have to do that. And 1,000 tagged smolts and 300 tagged silver eels were released upstream. And with the antennas that were installed, you could say which path the fish took, whether they would pass the turbine or not. Well, here you can see the installation from top, and the antennas are the big black lines with the numbers. Well, the results are still under study, but the first results are already promising. First, the screen fulfills its aim. There are no fish, no smolts or eels went over the door through the screen or through the turbine. However, the routes downstream have surprised, because most fish passed via the spillway. So that's the blue canal over here, and via the vertical slot. So that's the green, like that. Well, they were not or hardly passing via the intended bypass, and the eel shaft had troubles with obstructions and was hardly usable. So I think there's good news and there's more to learn. Then we go to the alternative turbine design. Also a question already posed. Well, the first one that was where we found studies was on the Archimedes screw turbine. Of course, this is a very, very, very old design, but mainly used for pumping. Well, it's about usable up to 15 cubic meters per second and 10 meters head, and you could produce up to 500 kilowatts. And the studies on fish mortality there have different outcomes. Some studies report no mortality at all. Some studies report no mortality, but a little avoidance. And there was also a study in Krechting, Bocholter Aar River in Germany, that found a mortality of 5%, and the 5% were especially fish smaller than 10 centimeters. So the bigger fish passed unharmed, but the smaller ones didn't. Then there's the very low head. I think it's a French design. It can take from 10 to 27 cubic meters per second, 1.5 to 4.5 meters head, and it can produce up to 500 kilowatts. They have several tests performed also, and well, in some tests they found no mortality at all. And then there was one that found no mortality for the smaller ones, for the eel and the smolts, but up to 4% for adult salmon. And adult salmon, that was like this. So that's huge fishes that should pass there. And finally, but we will hear more about turbines later on, is the Pentair Fairbanks Nijhuis, which should be able to cope with 1.5 to 150 cubic meters, 1.5 to 8 meters head, and up to 5 megawatts of production. And tests with living eel, you can see the test facility here. They come in, the water flows here, and the eel was injected there and, well, goes down. 3 meters per second, 5.5 meters head, they found no direct mortality, and no means 0.0%, and also no delayed mortality, and in order to test that, they were kept for 96 hours. And as far as I know, they are planning to install an installation like this in a hydropower station along the Maas in the Netherlands. And the idea there was that the hydropower plant was told to install something with a mortality less than 2%. I think that I think that alternative turbines are the only solution for bigger hydropower installations along the Rhine. If you look at the Vogelgrün installation, it's about four turbines of 350 cubic meters each, and a head of 12 meters. I mean, that is you won't do that with a screen. You must do something with a turbine. We started this day with a question whether the current situation was okay or not. So I'll get to the most important thing, the downstream migration success. I've got two theoretical studies and one telemetry. The first one is a study from Annema from 2009, so from France. The effect of hydropower on fish migration does not only depend on the individual installations, but also on the amount and type of installations in a certain river stretch. And this is a study on the Mosel River in France regarding eel, and that showed that fish that have to pass all the hydropower installations only have a 3% chance of reaching the mouth of the Mosel unharmed. So you see the number of fish is slightly diminishing. However, you could say, well, not all the fish have to pass all the installations. So luckily, they work on another study, also by Annema, and it's still in preparation. And it's on the Eel River, tributary to the Rhine. And this study to eel and salmon took into account the spread of the populations in the river basin, their periods of downstream migration, and the hydrological data during those periods, as well as the data on the hydropower installations in the river basin. And it concluded a reduction of the salmon with 26% and of the eel of 29%. So that was for the whole basin. And finally, there was a combined German-Dutch study to the success rate of downstream migration of smolts from the Sieg River using telemetry, and that showed that only 18% successfully reached the North Sea. Now, it must be kept in mind that in this stretch of the Rhine there is hardly any hydropower. There are some small installations in the side branch of the Rhine that takes about 1/9 of the total discharge of the Rhine. So this is mainly, well, you could say 99% because of predation of birds and fish, etc. And fishing with fikes is forbidden in the Netherlands, so that could not be the case too. So I come to the conclusions. After a successful improvement of water quality and river continuity in the River Rhine, the salmon could be reintroduced. And with the growing numbers of fish migrating along the river, it became clear that not only the upstream but also the downstream migration must be secured. Hydropower installations form a serious threat, not only for the migrating smolts but also for eel. Well, in the recent past, several developments have focused on smaller hydropower. So we've seen the screens, mainly the screens. And the actual effectiveness of those measures must be checked on site, as we learned from Kostheim. And for bigger installations, new developments are urgently needed. Thank you for your attention.